Hello, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. Today on the list of interesting political things is the first and only 2020 vice presidential debate. The debate came less than 4 weeks from Election Day 2020, and the stakes are very high. It pits Democratic nominee and California Senator Kamala Harris against Republican nominee and sitting Vice President Mike Pence. The debate, moderated by the esteemed Susan Page of USA Today, focused heavily on the coronavirus. It came while President Donald Trump continues to be ill with the virus himself. It touched on healthcare, climate change, the economy, U.S. race relations, and the records of both presidential candidates, among other things. Today we're going to discuss what happened during the debate through the lens of takeaways from the BBC. We're going to go over some of the stronger points for each participant, and talk briefly about what this might mean for the race as a whole. And with that, let's dive right in. Now before we get into it, please bear in mind that we're using the BBC's takeaway for this analysis. They are an excellent news outlet, and they hold themselves to a very high standard of accuracy. But, in my opinion, they did miss out on a couple of notable moments over the course of the debate. Keep that in mind as we take a look at their first point. A different tone. The debate was heated, but nowhere near the chaotic mess of the first presidential debate. It almost appeared like a return to normalcy, with polite, dignified interruptions, and snarky, backhanded comments all around. Referring to each other as Mr. Vice President and Senator Harris didn't stop them from taking some serious shots at each other, though. Second on the list, COVID served as a backdrop for almost the entire debate. With the president still sick and continuing to tell people not to worry about the virus, the discussion focused heavily on what the administration has done and what the candidates would do to combat the disease. Among some of the most notable points of the debate was Harris delivering a blow on the 210,000 American dead. Pence, for his part, had his response ready. As the BBC notes, he said the Biden-Harris plan was largely a copy of what the Trump administration was already doing. Another fiery point was on the discussion of the vaccines. Harris noted that she would take a vaccine recommended to her by medical professionals, but would not take one recommended by the Trump campaign. Pence fired back with his own damaging blow, asking Harris to stop undermining people's confidence in vaccines using language that was reminiscent of discussions with anti-vaxxers. Moving on, I think this next headline is accurate, but doesn't tell the whole story. Biden's climate plan has been compared directly to the Green New Deal. An inaccurate point, but one that many believe, and Vice President Pence reinforced that last night. Biden has been quick to distance himself from the progressive climate plan, and Harris echoed that last night. For Pence's side, he continued the mantra of many conservatives to decline and deny the existence of man-made climate change, suggesting that the debate is still open on the subject. This is another inaccurate point, but again, many people still believe it. He also said something that I found flabbergasting. He said that with respect to climate change, the Trump campaign's position is, and always has been, to, quote, follow the science. This felt like madness to me. If he and his party had been following the science, there would have been city-sized solar farms in every state in the nation in 1986. This is a blatant inaccuracy and an obvious attack on the integrity of the scientific community, a community which I happen to hold in high regard. This was an unusual and interesting political move. If the campaign commits to this kind of rhetoric, and if it works, it could secure oil, coal, and natural gas interests in the minds of young people for an entire generation. That would be unimaginably lucrative for the Trump-Pence ticket, the Republican Party, and the fossil fuel energy companies. And it would be obviously bad for, everyone else. So I'm having trouble deciding if this was a faux pas or the cleverest political move I've ever seen. In the next section, on the recent and not so recent racial unrest in the United States, there's a clear contrast between the candidates. Pence took the somewhat standard Republican position of standing with the police. He did not outright deny racism in America, but he did pivot away from the question very quickly, turning the discussion about racism into one about safety in the midst of the protests. I thought this, however, was the strongest section for Harris. She spoke of her experience in law enforcement and unambiguously supported the protesters, even referencing the 8 minutes and 46 seconds over the course of which George Floyd was suffocated to death. As support for this section, she referenced Trump's continued refusal to distance himself from white supremacists, assertions which Pence did nothing but state was untrue. In this last section, they discussed the candidates' focus on the future of American politics, including the possibility of the vice presidential candidate's future political ambitions. But that's not a new point. Everyone knows that vice presidents often have ambitions for higher office. I think that I want to use this section to discuss one of the most notable points about the debate from a campaign perspective, and one that I think wasn't adequately discussed in this article, that being the courts. The future of the courts are a touchy subject for both candidates right now. For Pence, there's the upcoming confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, even amid controversy about the U.S. Senate's decision in 2016 to block the nomination of Merrick Garland. This leads to another can of worms for the Trump-Pence ticket, with discussion of conflicts of interest between the new potential justice being added and the possibility of the Trump campaign contesting the election in court. On the Biden-Harris side, there has been a very real discussion of packing courts in recent weeks, which is a bold move politically. And now, for the second debate in a row, the Biden team has refused to respond to questions about the topic when pressed. And that risks making court packing a real campaign issue. And I think that that's very dangerous for Harris and Biden. This was a very strong point for Pence. He hammered more than once on the campaign's continued silence on the issue, and Harris managed to escape a really bad question by the grace of both her own debating skills and Susan Page calling time. And finally, let's talk about the most notable insect I've ever seen at a debate, at least since 2016. Late in the debate, a fly landed in Mike Pence's hair, and stayed there for some minutes. This happened, and frankly, I don't really care. Flies land on people all the time, but the internet has been positively buzzing about it. And I think that characterizes this debate and the presidential debates as a whole. The debate was slow and patient, it wasn't fiery, and neither candidate gave up much ground. Undecided voters, even if they even exist anymore, won't be swayed by slow, steady discussions of policy positions, but by quips, clips, and dramatic lines. And that, I think, was the reason that the fly garnered more attention than either of the candidates did. I think if I was to pick a candidate whose campaign came out on top, it would probably be Harris. Pence's conservative positions may have shored up his base, but his base wasn't really in jeopardy. However, I think that Harris, similar to Biden last week, presented a small number of real, meaningful policy positions. One that stuck out to me was a plan to make two-year community college free if your household makes less than $125,000 a year. She also noted a student loan reimbursement program to the tune of $10,000 per person. These sorts of things, I think, will help to quell some of the fears of the far left that their candidate is a Republican in disguise, and therefore they might energize some of the younger, more liberal voters that might have stayed home. There's 1,000 other things we could go over. There was Harris's missed opportunity to hammer Pence on abortion rights, something he's been outspoken against for years. And there was the continued, somewhat ominous threat that the Trump campaign won't accept the results of the election. But honestly, I can't see this debate swinging more than 0.25%, 0.5% in one direction or the other. I don't think that this will have a meaningful impact on the race going forward. So, as always, please remember to subscribe and keep up to date on all the most interesting things as we spiral toward this ever more interesting election. And until next time, be like the 2020 vice presidential debate. Be calm and be measured. And be just a little heated. And above all, be interesting. See you next time.